What's going on, everybody? I'm Dan, and this is Midwest Angling. And today, we're talking tip-ups. Maybe you're watching this video because you're new to ice fishing and you've never used tip-ups before. Maybe you got a new set and you just want to see if there's a new way of doing something that you haven't seen before. Well, today we're going to discuss the various different types of tip-ups, and I've also got several brand new tip-ups that we are going to set up together. We're going to start off by talking about the different types of tip-ups that there are, as well as the pros and cons on why you might select each one. Most tip-ups that you buy fall into three categories. They are stick, plank, and hybrids. This right here is a brand new Heritage Laker. This is what you would call a stick tip-up. It's pretty self-explanatory, but the basic structure of the tip-up is it's a bunch of sticks that are bolted together. The reel is down here, completely under the water, and the flag is triggered like so. You gotta watch out, because if you're not careful, when this goes off, it'll whip you right in the face. But essentially, the fish pulls out line, and that activates the flag. These tip-ups are really good for when you have really deep snow, or you need a highly visible trap. They also have a much larger spool than plank tip-ups. Therefore, if you're targeting fish like lake trout and pike that really like to run, or they might be very large fish that you want to be able to give a lot of line to if need be, these are the way to go. The downside is that because of the mechanism that trips it, they're not exactly super sensitive. Now, you can play with this and get it so that it's barely sitting on the trigger. That way, hardly any effort is going to be required to set it off. However, no matter how light you set these, generally they are never going to be as sensitive as a plank tip-up. And that's alright. You know, you don't just have one tool in your toolbox to do every job. The next type of tip-up is called a plank. Understandably, because the base of it is just this nice little plank of wood. These are really straightforward and easy to use. And the plus side of these is that these are super smooth. So if you got really finicky fish like walleyes, it doesn't take hardly any effort to trip that flag. In addition to being really sensitive, these tip-ups have the advantage of being really compact. When you're done, they just fold up like this, and a lot of times they can fit right in a 5-gallon bucket or a pack basket. One of the disadvantages to these is that unfortunately with the design, there's really just not a whole lot of line that you can put on these. But if you're going for fish like crappies and walleyes that don't really like to run, these are the perfect choice. And the third tip-up is called a hybrid. This is because it incorporates elements of traditional tip-ups with a rod and reel. Now, this one right here is actually homemade. I threw this together using parts that you can get at the hardware store. But you can get these professionally made as well. Some examples would be the Finicky Fooler or the iFish Pro. These work by running the line through your trigger system. Setting your tension properly is key. And as the fish comes along and whacks it, the flag goes up, and then you fight the fish on the rod and reel. Hybrid tip-ups have the advantage of giving you complete control in fighting the fish. The disadvantages is that you have double the stuff that you have to pack. You need to pack the tip-up itself and a rod to use it. But they're particularly handy when you're fighting big fish that you really want that leverage of a rod. Now, we've gone over what the various different types of tip-ups are, so let's say that you buy a new one and you don't know where to start. Well, that's where we're going to put this bad boy together. This is a brand new Orgiginal Beaver Dam tip-up. We're going to take this guy out of here. Made in the USA. Ready to go. Now, beaver dams come right out of the package, pre-greased and ready to go. I suppose you could say that that might be a bit of a disadvantage for the plank tip-ups compared to the stick tip-ups. Plank tip-ups do require some maintenance to keep this tube running smooth. However, if you keep your plank tip-ups nice and greased up every season, or maybe twice a season if you're hitting the ice really often, there is no substitute for how smooth these tip-ups are. So to start off, we're going to need some line. For my plank tip-ups, I like to get 50-yard spools because that'll fit on these spools perfectly. This is Beaver Dam branded line, 30-pound, 50 yards. Now, I prefer to use actual tip-up line on tip-ups because it's specially designed to handle the conditions that you are going to put this tip-up in. One advantage that a plank tip-up has over a stick-up trap is that when we line this, we're going to be able to do it in hyperdrive. I'm going to start by putting this spool inside my line box. That way we can ensure that we don't have a mess when we do this. I'll place this on the floor. Now, we're going to use our handy-dandy drill. Now, because I'm using a drill, I'm going to be going pretty fast. So I'm actually not going to be running it through the line keeper at this time. We will do that when we actually set up the leader. Now, there are all kinds of different knots that you can use to attach the line to the base of the spool. I tend to just use a couple of overhand knots because in reality, there's so much line on these that if I'm getting to the point where I'm using all 50 yards, I'm not using the right tip-up for the application. So I'm going to get these on here as tight as I can get them, give the tag end the old snippy snip, and now this next part is actually fairly important. And I actually never even really thought about this until recently with a conversation with my good buddy Thomas Drosty from Team Walleye Guys Guide Service. This little part is often overlooked by people. If you want this tip-up to be the smoothest it could possibly be with the least amount of tension, believe it or not, the direction that you wind this line actually matters. And it all has to do with the pressure that's being put on the trigger. So if we turn towards the flag base, it's going to come off a lot easier. Whereas if it's going the other way, it's going to have to fight going uphill, and it's going to take longer to come out with more resistance. So in order to make sure that we don't get this backwards, when we're winding it, we need to make sure that it's going away from the base. So now that we've got it started, we're going to take our drill, and we're going to get this on here nice and tight. So now we got it set up. And now this next part is really important. We need to make sure that as we're winding this, we are moving back and forth on the spool to ensure that it goes on in a level fashion. Now remember, just because we're using power tools doesn't mean that we have to do this at the speed of light. Slow and steady wins the race. But by doing this, we are saving ourselves so much work. Now that we've spooled the tip up, the next thing that we need to do is figure out what we are going to use for a line marker. A line marker is a very key piece of equipment on these because you are setting your tip up to a very specific depth. One of the most common are these little teeny tiny bobbers that clip right on the line. Unfortunately, when you're ice fishing though, a lot of times you're wearing big, thick, heavy gloves, and that makes operating these kind of a chore. That's why I picked up these HT Styrofloats. It's basically just a little small foam bobber, and it's pegged in place using a half of a toothpick. There's various other things that you can use too. A lot of people like to use a button. Some people use a rubber band. They just wrap it around itself on the line and then you can slide it up and down to adjust. You can also use bobber stops or stop weight, anything that marks that line. That way you know exactly where to reel it back to, and it will also help you if there's a wind flag, you'll be able to see that no line has been pulled from the spool. Now these Styrofloats, when they're brand new, you need to start by poking a hole. And when they are brand new, it can actually be fairly tricky to get the line through there the first time. We're going to run that toothpick through there a couple times to get it nice and wide open. Next, we're going to take the line and we're going to try to stab the toothpick into that line as best we can. Make sure that we leave plenty to go out the other side. Now, when we thread this line through here, I guess it actually really doesn't matter. I just start with the yellow ends, that way that is up top, and then we just poke that line right through. Now we just make sure that we grab onto the line, pull it off the toothpick, pull the toothpick back through, and now we've got it threaded. This next part is entirely up to you. I like to use a snap swivel. A lot of people just use barrel swivels for their leader, but the reason I do is that I will go ahead at the beginning of the season and I will pre-tie a bunch of leaders on a Lindy Rigger. That way, if the line breaks, if I lose a hook, I don't have to screw around tying a hook on. I can just go to the tackle box, get this out, get a new leader, snap it in, and it's back in the water ready to catch another fish. The other thing is, this allows you to very quickly switch between heavy-duty leaders for things like pike and lakers, or smaller things like walleyes and crappie. I'm gonna go through, and I use a uni knot for about everything. Tying leaders to my jig poles, tying lures on. It's a really easy knot. All you do is just run a loop through, take your tag end, make a loop, try to run it through about 7 times. Make sure that you wet the line, and then we pull it tight. So now I can go ahead and take one of my pre-tied lines and add it up. How I make these is quite simple. I just use about 10-pound mono for walleye leaders. And I do about my elbow's wingspan. The lake that I fish is fairly cloudy water, so I don't really need to get that long of a leader. But the other thing is I make sure that I put a split shot weight less than a foot from the hook. And the reason that we do that is so that certain fish are very particular about the bait and where they want it. On a lake with fairly cloudy water, like the peat and well flowage that I fish, they really can't see more than a couple feet in front of them. So if that weight is really high up the line, that minnow has a lot more free range that he can swim around. It's that way, by making sure that the weight is close to the hook, there's only about a foot or less that the minnow can travel away from the weight. When it comes to the hooks that I'm using on my leaders, I like to use an octopus hook. I used to use trebles, but I kind of got away from that because they're actually quite indiscriminate on where they grab in the fish's mouth. It doesn't really matter if it's the throat, the lips, the gills, it's going in and it's ripping. But the way that octopus hooks function, when tension is placed on, it's going to hook into the corner of the mouth. The other thing that I like to do is I've started pinching the barbs down on all my set line hooks. That doesn't matter if I'm ice fishing or open water fishing. I found that I really don't lose any fish as long as I keep that line tight. And I especially ran into this problem when walleye fishing. A lot of times walleye will like to sit there and chew on a minnow, and oftentimes they are really quick to swallow that bait. So since I've started pinching the barbs down, I don't have to worry about potentially killing any fish that I need to release, whether they be slots or short. With a barbless hook, all you gotta do is just get in there and it pops right out. The only thing that you need to keep in mind if you're gonna go barbless is you can't give that fish too long to run with it. Otherwise, he might work your minnow off and then he's gone. Another problem that can arise if you're using really big bait, it might have the strength to wiggle itself right off that hook. One way that you can prevent this is if you take a small chunk of soft plastic. They call that a button, and you slide it over the point of the hook after you put your bait on. The soft plastic will bind to the hook itself, and it will help stop that minnow from bouncing off. Now that we've rigged up our brand new Beaver Dam tip-up, there's a couple ways that you can store it without turning your line into a jumbled mess. The way that Beaver Dam does this right out of the box is they include a nice little O-ring right here that you can put your hook on. And basically, you fold the tip-up up, making sure that your line keeper is on the top side, and then you can just adjust the spool. Make it the proper length, set it in the O-ring, and then turn the spool to tighten accordingly. Then you can go and take the shaft of the flag and put it right in that hole down there in the spool. And in theory, that should keep your line and spool from coming undone. But as you might be able to see here, I don't like this because they don't have holes in the spool going all the way around. So realistically, there's only 2 points where you could stick that flag in where it's actually going to be tight. And odds are, unless you trim the line perfectly to be at that point, you're never gonna be there. So what I like to do is I like to physically remove the line from this keeper. I then slide the keeper out of the way, and then I make sure that I wrap this nice and tight. Get the hook right there. And then I use these spool wraps. Put the hook through the grommet on the wrap, and then we just wrap it around. And there. Now our spool can spin around and that line isn't going anywhere. So it doesn't really matter where the spool is. We can put the flag right in, and now it's ready to go in the bucket or your tackle bag. You can purchase pre-made spool wraps like these. You can also make your own using a strip of Velcro and a grommet tool. You can also go super simple and just punch a hole in it, or get the wraps that have a slot in them so that you can wrap it around and get something really tight. Any of these works, and it will help to keep your line from becoming a big mess. Now the process for spooling a stick-up is going to require a little bit more elbow grease. Because this reel is on here more like a traditional fishing reel, we can't really use the drill to wind it up. So just like the beaver dam, to start spooling this heritage laker, I'm going to start by just doing a quick double overhand knot. Get that started. Snip off our tag end. Now the stick up, it's actually more important which direction you wind your reel than on the beaver dam. The reason being is that the way that this trigger mechanism works, the spool has to spin a certain way to make it trip. If you wind it backwards, it's going to hit against it, and it's not going to pull any line out, but it's not going to trip your flag. So that fish is just going to hit that, and he's probably going to be gone when he feels the resistance. So just like when we did the plank, we want to go backwards from the direction that we want it to actually spool in. So when we're winding this on, we want it to hit, because that way when we're pulling the line off, it's going to trip the trigger. Now the best way that I've found to do this is actually not to reel it. I'm just going to go overhand. That will give you the most control when you're spooling these tip-ups. And that way you can get the line nice and level and really tight. Thing is, with 100 yards of line, this actually takes a really long time. So I think I'm going to put you on fast forward mode. So now that we've got our real workout in, we're just going to take the line and we're going to verify that we put it on in the right direction. Just be careful. I've been whipped in the face with these a time or two. They don't feel good. But as you can see, when we pull our line, that flag is going to go off. So now all we have to do is attach our line marker, just like we did on the beaver dam, and hook up our leader. Attach our snap swivel. And there we have it. Now we're ready for our leader. Now on my pike leaders, I pretty much use the same process, it's just everything is bigger. I start off with 40-pound monofilament Berkeley big game line. It's basically guitar string. Once again, I will put my split shot fairly close to the hook. That will help make sure that a bigger bait on a pike line is less likely to take off on you, be up in the water column where he's not supposed to be. And then I will use actually a fairly thin wire leader. Now this is actually only about an 18-pound leader, and I realistically don't think I need more than that. But where this is going to come in handy is this is fairly thin and hard to see, especially in the cloudy waters we have in central Wisconsin. And I'm going to hook that up once again with an octopus hook, just a lot bigger. Once again, pinching down that barb to make sure that we don't damage fish if they take it deep. You can buy pre-made pike leaders that just use a really heavy gauge of fluorocarbon. I've used these in the past, and pike really don't saw through them. The thing that I don't like about them is that, you really should buy a new set every year, and those can get expensive. We're going to attach this to our snap swivel. And then I'm going to use these brand new spool wraps. Wrap it around, run the hook through, and wrap it around. Now these Eagle Claw spool wraps, they're not the best, but they're only a couple bucks at Walmart and you can get them right off the shelf. Thing is that you'll need to cut these to length so that way you don't have a big long tail end, because they've only got one spot that's actually Velcro on them. So I'm just going to trim them to length. And now we got a nice spool that's not going to come undone on us. Fold the flag back around into the storage tab, and we are ready to go put some big gators on the ice. And then next season on your Beaver Dam tip-ups, make sure that you get a tube of this grease and get it nice and greased up. That is a surefire way to ensure that your Beaver Dam tip-up will be smooth for years to come and you will hand it down to your grandchildren. So that's going to do it for today. I hope that this was helpful to you. If you found this video helpful, please do me a favor and hit that like button. That'll help to share this video with new audiences. And if you haven't done so already, please make sure that you subscribe. That way you won't miss any of my fishing adventures as soon as they come out. And if you have any further questions, please make sure to leave a comment below. This has been Midwest Angling. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you on the next one.